I'm Pete Sartes for The Lawyer You Know, and today George and I are going to teach you how to buy a car like a lawyer. Today, George and I are going to teach you how to buy a car like a lawyer. If you like this video, hit like below. If you like content like this, subscribe to our page. If you have any questions you want answered, put it down below in the comment section. We'll take a look at it and see if we can do a video to answer your questions in the future. Let's buy a car like a lawyer. What do you do? How do you start the process of buying a car?
Well, I think the first thing that everybody has to do is decide what their budget is. How much can they afford? And when we're talking about afford, we're not talking about monthly payments. That's a big mistake people make. Okay, can I afford the monthly payment? Well, the same monthly payment for a 7-year finance versus a 5-year finance, it can cost you a lot more money because you're paying all that interest. When you're talking about what you can afford, think about other costs that are involved. You've got tax. Sometimes there's an upfront cost on the car before you even buy it. So they want so much down and then so much a month. And you say, oh, I want $180 a month. Well, they say, hey, fine, no problem, we can get you $180, but we want $10,000 down, and then you'll have a $180 a month payment.
Is there a rule of thumb for people when they're looking at their own budgets and how much they should be spending on a car? I mean, compared to food and rent and things like that.
Well, I think that for some people, it will depend on a percentage of their income. They've got to decide where you're not supposed to spend any more than, for instance, 25 to 35% of your income on housing. So you got to kind of take that out. And then you've got to take out other costs like your food and your entertainment costs. You got to decide in a budget. You got to put it all down. And I think then when you talk about a car comes down the list.
Okay, so once we know, how do we figure out what our budget is, I guess? At some point, you got to sit down and figure out how much you want to spend or how much you should spend is probably the better way to say it for a car. How do I get people to that point?
Well, again, you got to look at what your income is. But you just can't look at the car payment. You have to look at how much is the insurance going to be. Can you make that payment? How much do you spend on parking if you're in a locality where you have to pay for parking every day? How much do you spend on gas and fuel? Do you travel 30 miles a day or do you travel 15 miles a day to work? All those go in or factor into how much this car is going to cost you. And you've got to sit down and figure that out and figure out a budget. And then when you have that budget, you've got to stick to it and not let, and we'll talk about it later on, but not let some salesman change your budget once you've decided what it is.
All right, so you figure out your budget, you sit down, you know what you should spend on this car. How do you then go about finding the right car? And I know how I do it. I look online and I find the one that makes my heart pound. I'm like, I'm gonna get that one. And then I realize maybe I shouldn't get that one. Actually, you normally tell me, Pete, you probably should get that one. But how do you find the right vehicle?
What are your needs? Do you need is it a family car? Do you need a 4-door? Do you have kids that have to fit in the back seat? Do you have a car seat that has to fit in that back seat? A lot of car seats really squeeze into that back seat, so the person sitting in front, their knees are in their chest. So you've got to figure out, what are your needs? Do you have a need, again, family, 4 doors? Do you need an SUV? The hottest cars on the market right now are SUVs because people are realizing it's, has a utility. You can really use an SUV for a lot of things. Gas mileage that the car gets. Do you travel 30 miles a day just to get to work? Well, gas costs or your fuel costs are going to be a really significant aspect. So you need to get a really fuel efficient car. If you don't care about those things, like you, where you say, you just want to get something flashy, well, then you got to decide, what's the flashiest car that I can afford and the one that's going to make heads turn? And let's face it, emotion is a lot of buying a car. Do I love that car? Is it something I really want? Do I want to drive it every day? Do I want it to be an everyday driver? Is it the car I'm going to drive every day?
One of the things that I did over the course of the years of owning cars is I always thought, at least I tried to think ahead. What am I going to need 2 years down the line? What kind of car is going to fit my lifestyle? And more than once, I'll look at a car and say, oh yeah, I really want this cool sports car, but I have to take kids to school every day. There's 2 of them. I can't fit them in a 2-seat car. So there's a practicality about thinking ahead. I know people that, in my opinion, I don't understand why, they'll buy these cool little sports cars, but they live in Colorado, so they can't use them 9 months out of the year. Think about what your life is like and actually pick a car that meets your needs, but I think makes you happy to drive because you're going to be having this thing. It's a big purchase for a little bit of time.
Right, and it's something you're being every day. There are few things in life you use more than your car.
Let's talk about the car buying process. Generally speaking, there's lingo in the car world. Do you think it's important when you consider going out to buy a car, do you actually understand the lingo that the dealers are using?
Well, unfortunately, not everybody's a lawyer when they go into a car buying process. And the salesman may use a lot of terms that you really don't understand, like, when they talk about interest rates, they talk about different kinds of interest rates. When they talk about, there's taxes. Well, is it just the 7% sales tax? Are there other taxes in your locality for a car? Is your car a car that's going to have a rebate? By rebate, that means that the company is kicking back money to the car dealer, and the car dealer gets that money. You may not even know it. They may say, look, we'll give you a great deal on a car, and it's about $2,000 less than you thought. But the reason is the car dealer is getting a $2,000 rebate.
Actually, the car dealer may be getting a $5,000 rebate and only passing $2,000 on to you.
Right.
So I guess you have to understand the lingo. And if you're going to lease a car, they're going to throw around terms like residual value, which is what the car is worth after you give it back, meaning what the payment of the portion you're using is to be based off of.
Right. And that's the gamble that everybody has. You lease a car, if you lease a car, you lease a car for X number of years. What will it be worth at the end of that? And the dealership has to estimate that so they don't lose money. And let's face it, they don't lose money.
So what's the process? What is the process by which a car dealer sells a car? How do they make money?
Well, they make money on basically the spread. What they pay for the car versus what you pay for the car. And the cost of them having the car. And a lot of this is known as the pack, which is another one of the terms you hear in car dealers. And they won't tell you about the pack. But what the pack is, that dealership has so much in advertising costs. A percentage of the advertising cost gets tacked on to the price of that car. So if they spend $200,000 doing advertising that month, well, when you buy that car, a percentage of that advertising expense they put on the car. Interest. Car dealers do things like floor plans. That's another term that you'll hear them use. They have a floor plan. They pay interest on the cars on their lot. So they buy 100 cars from General Motors. Those 100 cars are on their lot. They finance the 100 cars from a bank. The bank loans them the money to buy the 100 cars. They pay interest on that. So that's another cost that they add on to the car you're buying.
So what happens when the dealer comes up to you and says, let me show you the invoice of that car? Is that invoice what that dealer actually paid for that vehicle?
Well, that's a yes and no. It's actually yes, they did pay that money for the vehicle. However, what it doesn't show is at the end of every year, depending on how many cars that dealer sold, the General Motors, the manufacturer, will kick back money to the dealer for those cars. So if he pays $10,000, end of the year, he may get another $1,000 on that car from the manufacturer. So that rebate doesn't go to the buyer, you, but you've got to know when you're negotiating that he's going to make money on that car at the end of the year anyway.
And you also have to be very conscious about all the little add-ins that the dealers put in. And when you actually put the deal together, when there's an actual formal document that the dealer puts together, you'll see line items. You'll see dealer fee, which translates to pure profit for the dealer. This can range from a couple $100 to, for some exotic cars, $1,000 or $2,000.
Absolutely.
And that number is pure profit to the dealership. You'll also see them making money on little add-ins like, we put spray protectant on the car, $1,500. Pinstriping, we can put pinstripes on your car, $500. Window tinting. So just be conscious that when you actually get to putting that deal together, don't be so excited because you think you're done, because the dealer is still going to try to put in things in that contract that are going to cost you money that you may not need to spend.
Let me give you some hints on those add-ons. Number one, any car that's been manufactured in the last 5 or 10 years has underbody protection. You don't need any additional underbody protection. It's already there. And a lot of things you don't need, like the current paint they put on modern cars, you don't need a clear coat on top of
The
that paint.
protectants that they throw on there.
You don't need that. You don't need that on the interior as well. these are all add-ons that you do not need, but they will try to sell you. The one add-on that you might want to consider is when they give you this extended warranty. Where they say, the car's warranted for 3 years, but we'll give it to you for another 1 or 2 years with this extended warranty. Depending on the car you buy, if it's a car, number one, you're going to keep, and if it's a car that is expensive to repair. Like for instance, if you got a Toyota Corolla, it probably isn't worth getting the extended warranty. But if you end up getting a Jaguar, for instance, with a certain kind of repair history, it may pay to get you that extended warranty. So you've got to make that decision based on the car that you have and the reliability of that car over the years that you're going to own the car.
So, when do you start car shopping?
I
never stop.
I love car shopping. And I love car shopping only because I like to think about it. I will spend months doing research. And that's another thing is, do not start to look for a car when you absolutely need the car, because then you don't have the time to shop around. So you got to start, I do it months ahead. I start watching the car. First, I start determining, the car I want. Once I've decided the type of car I want, I start checking. You've got sites like Car Guru, which will tell you what people are selling that car for on the internet. That's a way to determine the price. Edmunds.com, another website that will tell you how much the car is worth and what you should be buying it for. But they even tell you what the average purchase price of that car is below what the list price is of that car. You've got the Kelley Blue Book, which will tell you the value of the car. So you've got a lot of resources online, things that years ago they didn't have when they were negotiating. So when you start negotiating, you can start doing this. And so you start looking for it. The other thing you start doing, consumer reports. You start looking at reliability factors of the car. Do you want to get a car that has been known to break down a lot, or one that's got a good record of being reliable? And those are the kind of things you can do for months and follow the car trends on the car you want to see whether or not it's holding its value as well.
See, now I agree that you shouldn't wait till you absolutely need a car, because then you're in trouble. Then you have no choice. You're not going to get the best deal. But I have the other problem. I can't start looking at cars months in advance because I'm going to wind up buying a car too soon. And what I mean by that is you got to be very careful. If your lease isn't up for another, let's just say, 9 months, don't start shopping for a car that you're, at 9 months, because once you find the car you have your heart set on, you're more likely to go buy that car, and now you've got a problem because you've still got a car that you have payments on, or your lease isn't over yet, so you wind up overlapping payments. You really got to time it to when you don't need a car, but not so soon where you wind up talking yourself into getting a car.
And I think that later on we'll talk about leases, because leases have some different categories or some different reasons how you shop for a car on a lease versus buying a new or a used car. And when you buy I was talking about all those websites, they're great for used cars, because there are those used cars. You can put in 2014 Jeep Renegade and do a nationwide search, and you'll find 100 of them, and you'll see what people are selling them for. And Car Guru even tells you whether it's a good deal, a bad deal, or a fair deal. So you can see what is the price you should be paying. You see that good deal price, so that you're ready and armed with it when you walk into a dealership.
So, now you know what kind of car you want, you know your budget, you know what kind of car you want, you know when you should be shopping for it. The next question is, how are you going to pay for this thing? Do you pay for the car in cash? Do you finance it? How do you come to that decision?
Well, that's an advanced decision. It's another one of those things you do before you go to the dealership. When you're shopping for the car, you should also be shopping for interest rates, and you should be looking at banks. If you have a credit union, that's a good place to go. And go to more than one place and find out what is the interest rate on buying a car. Do you finance it for 4, 5, 6, or 7 years? I just saw a statistic that in the last year, 6-year loans have gone up 31% of the market right now. 6 years is a long time. And when you add on that the interest, you got to realize how much you're really paying for the car at the very end of that 6 year. How much did you pay for the car itself, and how much of it was interest? And do not forget, interest is front loaded. So that means that when you buy a car and you finance it for 6 years, if you're tired of it in 3 years, you've paid just about all the interest already, and you still owe a ton of money on the car.
And one of the things that I think that is important to do when you're considering the financing versus cash option is, I mean, look at what the offers are on the manufacturer's website, because a lot of times a manufacturer or a special will say 0 interest for 60 months. You may be able to pay for that car in cash, but it might make more sense for you to keep your money and invest it in something and just pay the monthly payment since they're charging you no interest. I've gone back and forth. I finance cars. I pay for cars in cash, and I know you do the same thing. You really got to look at the numbers, right? It all comes down to the numbers.
And the reason you go ahead of time to check out what the interest rates are, for instance, because sometimes you'll find out the interest rates are maybe 3% to buy the car. If you don't do that, when you go into that dealer and that dealer says, okay, we'll finance the car for 6%. Well, there's a 3% spread there. Who do you think gets that money? It's split between the finance company and the dealership. So dealerships make money on you financing the car even. So that's why you've got to know before you go in there, do I get a better deal outside of the dealership or in the dealership when I finance the car?
Would you get pre-approved for financing before you even walk into the dealership?
Yes, I would. I'd get pre-approved. I'd know where I was going. I'd get the application in. I'd have all that done so that you prevent any delays. Even though you're pre-approved, you can always walk away from the pre-approved if by some chance the dealership gives you a better interest rate.
And one of the things that you should do, and a lot of people don't think of, is you go to your bank, you go to your credit union. Sometimes check with your insurance company. Your car insurance companies sometimes offer benefits. For example, USAA provides you the benefit of giving you pre-approval and an interest rate for a vehicle before you go in and shop. So your insurance company will actually help you put this all together before you go car shopping. And they'll even tell you what the realistic numbers on that car should be.
Well, that's an interesting point because people shouldn't forget they may belong to organizations that give them a car buying incentive. For instance, Costco. Costco says, go to these dealerships, they'll give you a coupon so that if they're on the Costco organization or whatever you call it, you get an extra $1,000 off. USAA, some of these other companies will actually give you discounts where dealers have made deals with them that if you come in and you're one of their members, they'll give you an extra $1,000 off. Make sure you know the price of the car because it may not be true. The $1,000 may be off the retail list of the car and not really what you could have bought it for if you didn't bring the $1,000 in. So you've got to still be careful. You've got to be smart. You got to know how much the car is going to cost you before you walk into the dealership.
All right, George, when is the right time to actually go into the dealership? Me, if the dealership's closing at 6 o'clock, I'm there at 5:45.
Well, here's
Does that work?
Here's the theory, and it really doesn't. The 5:45 doesn't work. I'll tell you what does work. What does work is the end of the month. Every dealership has a quota that they have to sell X number of cars every month. And that quota is important to the dealership because it determines what cars they're going to get in the future from the manufacturer. If they don't meet their quota, the manufacturer is going to cut down the number of cars they get and send those cars to another dealership that is meeting their quota. So the end of the month is pressure on that dealership, especially if they haven't met their quota, to sell X number of cars. So that's a great time. Another thing that's coming up, and this is unique to the pandemic. February 2021, the manufacturers say they're going to be back in full production.
Okay.
So that means that cars are going to start coming out like crazy February 2021. There may be some deals to be had there because their inventories are going to shoot up. Because their inventories right now are low because manufacturing has slowed up through the pandemic. But things may change, so people need to also look for that. Oh, one other time. September, October. New cars come out for the next year. Usually they bring them out in September or October. That means September, October of 20, the 21s came out. Well, that means the 20s they still had on their lot are now a year old.
And you're talking about new cars.
Right, these are new cars. So they're now, technically they're a year old because the 21 models come out. They start discounting those 20s every single month. And in December, sometimes you can get phenomenal deals on the 20s because the 21s have been on for 3 or 4 months and they don't want to hold on to these 20s, and the manufacturers give them huge rebates to get rid of their inventory.
All right, so based on that, we're ready to walk in the dealership?
Yes.
Okay, so if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, because in the next video, we're actually going to walk into the dealership and start the transaction of buying the car.